that works.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for tuning in today. This is the Positive Impact Project, and I'm Ingrid Karazinger here with Ken McLeod, who's going to be talking to us a little bit about what he does and his work in the Houston area. So welcome, Ken.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me, Ingrid. I appreciate it.
So tell our audience a little bit about what you do currently.
I'm a psychotherapist in private practice, a licensed clinical social worker. And a lot of my work focuses around a few, maybe 5 areas. I work with a lot of adults who were molested as children or some other forms of trauma. For example, someone who was recently in an auto accident and perhaps someone died because of their behavior. Those kinds of traumas, as well as childhood traumas. I work with sex addicts, which is a whole other kettle of fish. And sometimes those two connect, but not always. I do more work with couples than I ever thought I was going to do. And I laughingly say I've worked with every kind of couple imaginable except interspecies.
I suppose that it's a different doctor that takes a look at that.
It's a different doctor, yes. I do a lot of work with people who are dealing with LGBT issues, whether it's coming out, whether it's dealing with transitions for trans persons, and so forth. So that's kind of my field, and grief.
Okay, great. So that's a lot of things.
It is a lot of things, and yet, so many of them I see as being so connected because, and I think this is a piece that connects to your work. A lot of times people come to therapy because they're at a point of a spiritual crisis. They don't necessarily call it that, but that's what it is. You know, it's, if we look at the adult who was abused as a child, they're having memories, they're having flashbacks, or they're not, but they're having this anxiety that's connecting to the experiences they had when they were young. Or the person who's struggling coming to terms with their own identity as a trans person, as a gay man, as a lesbian, or in our culture now as bisexual, because that's a burgeoning and more acceptable subgroup in our culture. A few years back, not so much at all. So I think spiritual connections are a big piece of what we're doing in healing people.
And you know, I have a lot of different types of people come on my show as far as what their backgrounds are, what they do. And my main theme is really about those who work to help humanity. I mean, you could become a stockbroker and just go and make some money, or be a lawyer. And I'm sure that most people feel like they help in whatever they're doing. They have some justification that I'm doing some good. But I'm really focused on the people that really are doing stuff to help humanity and not always make a lot of money or have a lot of personal sacrifice doing it. So I guess my question also is, do you feel like it's a personal sacrifice, or that there's a lot of emotional things that you have to go through?
Well, first, it's very rewarding. I find it especially rewarding working with trauma survivors because I can see healing. A lot of times with other kinds of emotional change, it's so slow. But with a lot of trauma recovery, you can see big changes very fast, and that's amazingly rewarding. You know, the person who says, wow, since last week I slept every night. That's the first time in the last 15 years.
Wow, that's great.
Those are tangible differences. So you go home with that. Generally, and because I've been doing this a long time, and I started with some pretty heavy emotional stuff when I became a clinical social worker, generally I'm able to leave most of it at work. Every now and then there's someone who goes home with me, who haunts me, who worries me that, okay, are they really safe? Yes, they told me they were not going to kill themselves. And yes, they promised that they would call me before they did anything. But will they? Usually I can put that to bed, but every now and then.
I imagine that would be probably the hardest part of that.
I've been very lucky, and I'll say lucky, to have gotten this far into my practice and not had one of my clients suicide. Lucky.
Yeah, it's a hard business. And so tell us a little bit about what got you into this line of work.
Interesting. Yeah, it's a very specific thing. I was teaching theater and comparative literature in Louisiana. It was the mid-'80s. The AIDS crisis appeared, and I felt a calling to do something for my gay brothers. Just absolute calling. Plain and simple. It may sound cliche, it may sound hokey, but it was the real truth. And so I started volunteering and started going back to school to do a master's degree in clinical social work. Before I finished the degree, when I was 6 hours into a 60-hour master's degree, I was offered a job to organize and run a hospice for people dying of AIDS. So from that, I learned to leave it at work. And I had some good mentors and some wonderful support. And so I worked in the field of HIV for 13 years in various ways. That's how I ended up in my career as a clinical social worker, as opposed to continuing my background in drama for the child and adolescent.
Okay, which is fun.
Which is lots
but
of fun.
also it can be very therapeutic for people too.
Absolutely. And I certainly use a lot of dramatic techniques in the work that I do. I did some work earlier, no, I guess it was last week, that links to Gestalt and to Moreno's psychodrama, but it's straight out of drama therapy exercises where you have someone bring a photo of a problem person in their life, either someone they've not been able to let go of in terms of a broken relationship from years before, or a parent who was abusive in one way or another, and you have them talk to the picture like the person is really there, and then trade places and speak in the voice of that person.
I like this.
Yes. And depending on the person, you can go back and forth trading roles. Very dramatic. And years ago, when I was director of the counseling program at the Bering Memorial United Methodist Church, there were other therapists on the team, and we would staff. And I remember saying, "Do you use this?" And one said, "Well, I've always been afraid to try it." Another said, "I tried it; it didn't work for me." And I said, "Well, that's because you don't believe in it. You have to believe it." And I believe in it, so it works.
Yeah, and I also see, at least in my line of work, when I talk to someone and you build that communication, that trust, that they become more open
Yes.
to what you offer them. So if you already have that trust, then they're gonna believe it too.
That trust is critical, absolutely critical. I do a lot of work in EMDR. EMDR stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, which is not what it is, but it's what people thought it was when it was developed in the early...
I've tried that.
Oh, have you? Really?
I've tried it. It's actually very helpful.
It's very helpful. It's an amazing tool. It was developed in the mid to late 80s in California. And what it does is effectively knit together the two hemispheres of the brain. When we experience a trauma, we store the facts, the narrative, the story in the left side of the brain. We store the emotions in the right side of the brain. And in many trauma survivors, there are no connections between the two. So some people have the intuitive feeling that something happened, but they can't tell you the story. Others know something happened, and they still have these emotions over here in the corner that they don't connect to that being the reason. I think of a man one day who said, "You know, I've been very strange lately. When my wife and I are out driving and she reaches over and touches my thigh, I just feel flooded with anxiety." Well, I knew he'd been molested as a child, and I said, "How is that similar to your molestation?" And it was like, "Oh, that's how it always started." Because he would pick me up to take me for ice cream, he would reach over and touch my thigh, and it would be off and running. Our bodies have memory. We store things in the muscle that we don't necessarily connect to the story in our brain. So once we made that connection, he realized what was going on there. With EMDR, we look at the trauma and we stimulate both hemispheres of the brain, knitting the pieces back together. I like to say, if you think of your life as a file drawer, and you've got a folder with the facts, with the story in the very back, because it happened a long time ago, and you've got a folder with the emotions that's still in the front, what we want to do is move that folder back in sync. So I can say to you, I was once chased by a tiger. Well, it happened 20 years ago. I'm over it. The two folders are in sync. But if I say to you, I was once chased by a tiger, and I'm feeling, oh my God, I've got to run now because there's a tiger about to get me, They are not in sync. EMDR moves them together. We can actually look at the brain of people going through EMDR experiences, and you will see neural pathways being built on the MRIs. You can see it built.
That's fascinating.
It's just incredible.
Wow.
And yet at first blush, people look at it and be like, really, Ken? You know, this sounds like voodoo. It sounds like hokum. It's like the first person who told me about it as a therapist I love very much and respect very much, Melissa Beeson Smith. And we worked together, and she was telling me about this, and I said, oh, Melissa, that's just too California for me. And I know you're from California.
Yeah. I've heard that.
Yeah, it just sounded so new agey. Okay, you're going to hold a thought, and I'm going to move my fingers in front of your eyes to stimulate both hemispheres of the brain, and that's going to do something? Yes, it is. Mm-hmm. Yes, it is. So I do a lot of EMDR with trauma survivors.
Excellent.
A lot of times people come to me specifically for that. So,
as far as what you're doing now, are there other aspects, other things that you do outside of that, outside of your psychotherapy business?
Right. I'm very active in my church. I'm a Unitarian Universalist, have been for about 40 years. Spent part of that time as a religious educator for a church. Actually, I was considering the ministry when I decided to become a clinical social worker. It was that fork in the road. Yes, it really was. It was. It was like, okay, yes, I'd been teaching for 11 years, 12 years, something like that. And yes, but I would look out at those faces and think in a theater history course, yeah, I'm the only person in here who cares about this business, about the structure of the tragedies in ancient Greece. Yeah, nobody else cares.
I guess it's good to have that realization early on.
It was a very specific aha moment. It was really there. So that's when I started to look for something with more meaning.
Well, it's interesting. My mother, she was a ballerina.
Okay.
Until she was about 1920. And then she taught theater. Mm-hmm. And for several years, and then she got her master's in counseling and became a social worker.
Hello.
She had a very similar life. I find it fascinating. She ended up working kind of in a different area, but she said most people do end up in a place they don't expect when they get their degree. They don't always know where they're going to end up.
I spent 10 years in management in Medicaid HMOs. So I was involved with that when we rolled out managed Medicaid in Harris County and then spread it to the contiguous county. So that's very different, but it was, and was harder for me in terms of feeling like I was making a difference. Because so much of what I was doing was supervising other people, the nurses and social workers who would go into the homes to do assessments to determine what services were appropriate and so forth. It was a little harder because I was so removed from the direct contact. I was used to working with dying people. That's real. That's there, you know. And now I've been working for the last, how many years in private practice? I don't want to say. 15 years, 12 years, something like that. Okay. And it's immediate. It's direct. But there, I would have to say, well, okay, now how am I making a difference here? The one way that I really saw is the first VP that I worked for said, if we can help people change their behaviors from getting primary care in an emergency room, which is the worst place to get it, to establishing a relationship with a primary care physician that works for them, we will have made a huge impact, and we did that.
Wow,
that was
great.
Significant. I supervised a team, but I also had a small group of the, as I used to call them, the messiest of the messy, quadriplegics living at home alone, things of that sort, transplant patients before and after, really challenging folks, homeless people. I had a man with gangrene who would not go into a group home, would not go into a hospital, who would call and say, all right, these are the supplies I need, and I need them delivered tomorrow at 2 o'clock to the corner of. No, now wait, I can't do that. Let's talk about what we can do.
Wow.
But I think of a really lovely young woman who had been in a nasty car accident at 18 and had been quadriplegic for about 12 or 13 years. And her family had died around her and she was left. And she had always gotten her care at TIER, which is a brain injury, spinal injury center. But she would go there for a cold because she didn't know any better. That was not effective utilization of their resources, and it didn't get her more immediately what she needed. One thing that I helped her do was figure out, what's the primary care doctor for? When do you call them? How do you use them? How is that different from what you were doing going to TIER? She did it. She stayed out of the hospital a lot more over those years.
So more about wellness?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So that was rewarding.
I think we should have wellness. You know, we have McDonald's in every corner. We should have a wellness center.
Well,
You can come in and just get the care that you need. That's more about maintenance as opposed to emergencies.
And yet our healthcare system in this country is really an illness system. It is not designed for health care. It is not designed for wellness. If you want to take something for prevention, it's crazy. You know, it's not going to happen. I was talking with someone the other day, a gay man who wanted to take a drug that's referred to as PrEP. It prevents transmission of HIV. Period. Prevents it. Okay.
Is that new?
Within the last couple of years.
Okay.
And it was first developed as a treatment, and they realized it would block transmission. So it's not 100%, but it's like 99.99. I mean, it's hugely effective. And they've continued the studies, and they continue to show the same results. So he's on Medicare, okay? Man of a certain age, like me. And that drug, his copay for that drug on Medicare is $270.
That's a lot.
However, if he's prescribed that same drug for treatment, in other words, if he has HIV disease and he takes that drug for treatment, his copay is $35.
Wow.
But for prevention, it's $270.
Wow. So we're a little backwards. We really are.
In a nutshell, that says part of what's wrong with our healthcare delivery system.
Well, I was just thinking about things like, you know, massage therapy, spiritual counseling, things that a lot of people feel are, you know, like going to get a $5 cup of coffee.
Right.
It's like splurging as opposed to, you know what, you might live a longer, happier life.
Exactly.
I mean, it's our mindset, and I do talk to people about that all the time. It's like before you go to a doctor, you know, or you want a second opinion, try some alternative health ideas. You know, go around and see what can it hurt. You know what I mean?
Acupuncture, acupressure. You know, at least now, as opposed to say 20 years ago, when no insurance companies, except in California, would cover acupuncture. Now many of them will. But you very often have to have been through 3 or 4 other modalities before they'll allow that.
And even psychotherapy, you know, I still feel like that's at least more acceptable, or people understand the benefit. It's been around so long, but even that, I think that people don't realize a lot of their physical problems stem from all that emotional stuff that they could actually tackle it in that way.
Exactly.
Do you believe that?
I do, absolutely. I mean, I will say to somebody in grief, so how's your lower back? Because we know that's where the body stores grief, in those lower back muscles or chakras, or you know, that base of the body. I think a lot of people are afraid of psychotherapy because they've heard tell of people like Woody Allen, who has been to his analyst 5 days a week for the last 40 years, and he doesn't seem to be any better. You know, he's, I think, a brilliant artist, but maybe a troubled person.
Maybe he just wants to, you know, talk about his day, not necessarily the deeper issues when he's there.
But therapy doesn't have to be like that. In fact, it rarely is anymore. Very few, very, very few Freudian analysts around. Because nobody's insurance will pay for that. And so, like so many other things in our culture, what gets paid for sets the model. When insurance companies stop paying for 28-day inpatient treatments for chemical dependency, suddenly 28 days weren't necessary to be effective. Well, which one came from? Yeah, okay.
Well, so tell me, moving forward, what do you see for yourself, or is there anything more that you want?
You know, I often think I am luckier than just about anybody in the world. because there are very, very few things I wanted to do that I haven't done.
Well, that's exciting.
Very few things. As a child, I lived in a small coal mining town in Kentucky. I did not want to live in a small town. I was 8 or so when I told my parents, can't we move to a city? And can we live in an apartment instead of a house? I'd never seen an apartment except on TV or in the movies.
That's funny.
and I said, oh, and this grass, that's just too much effort. Just pave it and paint it green. That was before AstroTurf. If I'd have gone for AstroTurf, that'd have been right.
You were desperate.
And so in the middle of high school, I ended up living in inner city Detroit. Big city. It had everything I loved.
It's a city, all right.
It's a city. It's not the same now as it was in the 60s. And at that time, it was a tryout city for Broadway shows. So things would come there before they went to New York. Dolly and Fiddler on the Roof and Sweet Charity. Lots of wonderful shows played there first. Wonderful art museum. I was just there in August. It's just still marvelous. Symphony, just all kinds of things that for some reason, as a very young child, I knew I wanted. I knew, not just wanted, I needed. They were like lifeblood. And so when I got there, it was like, I'm home. This is marvelous. So I went to college to study theater, except I changed my mind and studied Spanish. Changing my mind has been a big theme in my life. And I had a mother who was often just so supportive. I mean, my mother and I lived with my aunt and grandmother in Detroit, and my aunt would say, what's he going to do with... My mother would say, don't worry about it. He'll figure it out. This is what he wants to do now.
That's great.
And she was not an educated
Support
woman.
is important.
It was just whatever seemed right.
So you think you've kind of already done everything?
No. Oh, no.
I mean, is there anything that you still want for yourself?
Yes, of course. I love traveling, so there are places I haven't been or places I want to revisit. As I look at coming to retirement in the not too distant future, I mean, my goodness, I'm 68.
I wouldn't have guessed that.
Thank you. I often hear that, and I appreciate that. But yes, I am 68, and I don't want to work forever. I love my work, but I don't want to do it forever. I used to weave and had shops and galleries that carried my work. I love doing that. I want to get back to that. I used to play piano, was a church organist from age 12 to 18. I want to play piano again. Yeah, there are things I want to do. And, I don't know about talent, but I have a lot of skills.
Multi-interests?
That's always been a challenge because I was interested in so many things that it's hard to focus. So you think, okay, I'm going to go to college and I've got a scholarship in theater, so I'll major in that, except I really am more interested in Spanish right now, so I'll do that. But then I came back to theater as a graduating senior and then did a master's degree in theater.
Right. Well, I find that the empaths tend to be more wild in their ideas or have many of them all the time because it's kind of like we're open to all of those cosmic ideas that are floating around, and we pick them out. We pick them out of the sky constantly, and so there are so many things that we feel we want to do, but we end up where we're supposed to be.
Yes,
right?
And it all adds up and makes sense. That's the thing that's crazy. What does Spanish literature have to do with being a therapist? Well, I sometimes do therapy in Spanish. That's one thing, and the breadth of representation of references and so forth. Doing theater, okay, the exercises I used to do with kids, they show up in my therapy sessions.
And art therapy
exactly. And I think, and you mentioned that. One time years ago, I was talking about EMDR earlier and the separation of the emotional and the narrative parts of the brain. I had a man who knew something had happened to him. He had a fact, maybe two, but not much. And one day I put paper and crayons in front of him and said, draw that. He didn't even pause. I would have looked at it and thought, well, what the hell am I going to draw? Or you would have probably too. Maybe, I don't know.
Pretty quick with the drawing.
Okay, well, he absolutely began immediately. And he was drawing and throwing down colors and picking up, and he finished with this huge, and I said, what's that? That's the tree where it happened. What's that? That's me hanging on the tree. What's that? That's the blood from my broken nose. What's that? That's my brother's friends. It was my brother's friends. Who's that? That's my mother. What's that expression on her face? She's angry. She's coming to punish me because I caused all this trouble. He was 4. So,
Art therapy.
yeah. So you access the cognitive from the intuitive.
It's amazing. It
We're
really
so
is.
used to accessing the intuitive and the cognitive, but that bridge is much harder to build. From intuitive to cognitive, yeah, that's much easier. Much easier.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the show today and
Absolutely.
sharing your knowledge with us. And if anybody has any questions for Ken, even after the show, just send them in and we'll see if we can get some answers.
Sure.
So what's a good place for them to find you, websites?
If you go on to Psychology Today, psychologytoday.com, they have a Find a Therapist tool, and you can just put my name in, Ken McLeod, KenMcleod.
Okay, and I'll put that link in there too.
I also have a couple of very brief videos on YouTube where I talk about very specific things like couples counseling or the role of laughter in therapy. I laugh a lot. You know that about me.
Right, yes.
And I've got this gigantic laugh. My theater students used to tell me they knew when I was in the audience.
My mother also had a giant laugh. Any party, I knew where she was in the room.
That's funny. That's funny. So if you go to YouTube and search Ken McLeod, LCSW, Licensed Clinical Social Worker,
Great.
then you can find those. There may be 7 or 8. I think the longest one may be 3 minutes, so there's not much there. But they're interesting.
Well, wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
And thanks for watching, you guys. Again, if you have
Thanks.
any questions, let us know. I hope you enjoyed the show. And we really appreciate Ken coming on. So thanks a lot and have a great day, everybody.
Have a wonderful day.
Bye-bye.
Bye.